Good morning. Thank you for joining us at today's conference, Frontiers of Defense Tech in the Shifting U.S. Alliances with Japan and Beyond, presented by the Japan program at Stanford's Shorenstein Asia Pacific Research Center, or APAC. My name is Kiyoteru Tsutsui, and I'm the director of APAC and its Japan program also. And it is my privilege to welcome you all to what promises to be a remarkable day of dialogue and discovery. I'm so looking forward to learning today about new developments in defense tech, AI, cyber, and space, and their implications for U.S. alliances with Japan and other countries in the Asia-Pacific region. At APAC and the Japan program, we strive to bridge Stanford's world-class research community with policymakers and practitioners in Washington, Tokyo, and throughout the region. And today's gathering embodies that mission. Before we begin, I'd like to express my deep gratitude to our distinguished panelists for joining us today and for sharing their expertise. Special thanks go to the Honorable Rui Matsukawa, member of the House of Councilors of the National Diet of Japan, the equivalent of senator in the US, and Mr. Masataka Okano, Mr. Okano, National Security Advisor and Vice Minister of Foreign Affairs of Japan between 2023 and 2025. We are honored to have you with us and other guests from Japan. Thank you for taking the time to travel to Stanford during the golden week of the holiday season in Japan. And your presence today especially underscores the vital importance of the US-Japan partnership. We're also delighted to welcome distinguished speakers from the US side who have devoted their career to public service, including Ambassador Thomas Schieffer, who was US Ambassador to Australia and also Japan. General John J. Raymond, the first chief of space operations of the US Space Force, and our own Lieutenant General H.L. McMaster, who will join later, the 25th US National Security Advisor from 2017 to 2018. And our keynote fireside chat will feature Lieutenant General McMaster and Mr. Okano, two former national security advisors from the US and from Japan, respectively. And the session will be moderated by Colin Carl, the director of Freeman Spogli Institute for International Studies, our parent institute. Under Colin's leadership, our institute continues to strengthen the bridge between rigorous scholarship and real-world policy impact. And this conference was inspired in part, at least, by Colin's vision for the FSI, Freeman Spogli Institute, to leverage Stanford University's strategic advantage of being on the cutting edge of technological innovations, being in Silicon Valley, and to link that advantage with FSI and APAC's research capacity and convening power. And earlier this academic year, we had the fortune of having Katherine Monahan, Kemy, arrive at APAC Japan program as a visiting scholar, and I asked her to help fulfill this vision in the form of an academic conference, and the result is today's event. Thank you, Kemy, so much for your invaluable help and leadership in putting together this event. And thank you to our wonderful staff at APAC for their dedication and care in ensuring that today's conference unfolds seamlessly. Now, let me briefly set the scene for our discussion today. We are gathered here at a consequential moment marked by historical transformations in the technologies of war and in the international geopolitical order. First, the technological revolution we're witnessing today in AI, cyber capabilities, and space systems, and advanced defense technologies are rapidly transforming how nations project power, deter adversaries, and collaborate with allies. We're witnessing these transformations in places like Ukraine and Iran, and these emerging technologies are forcing us to revisit our strategic calculations, national security postures, and defense preparedness in the Asia-Pacific region, as we think about potential contingencies in places like the Taiwan Strait, the Korean Peninsula, and South China Sea. Second, alongside these technological transformations, we are witnessing momentous changes in US foreign and trade policies. and Washington's turn away from the international rules-based order, which have forced its allies to question their long-held national security assumptions. The US alliances with Japan and other powers in Asia-Pacific, decades-old cornerstones of peace and security in the region, now face a test unlike any before. Can our alliance structures adapt quickly enough when we've unleashed the fastest growing technologies in human history? Additionally, we must note here that the private sector, not governments, now drives innovation in the technologies most critical to national security. This reality means that multilateral forums and bilateral initiatives are experimenting with new models of technology cooperation, moving beyond traditional government-to-government frameworks to create ecosystems that link research communities, defense industries, and innovation bases. The confluence of these forces presents policymakers today a Herculean task of adapting to the rapidly developing technological landscape with the shifting geopolitical background where alliances are in question and government's leadership in stimulating innovation and entrepreneurship is seemingly in decline. In this environment, how do we formulate policies to tackle difficult issues like export controls, data and technology sovereignty, and the integration of commercial technologies into defense applications? Can we ensure that the interoperability, trust, and institutional frameworks underpinning deterrence remain robust? And how do we prevent the pace of innovation from outstripping norms, standards, governance structures, and safety measures? In the United States, the standoff between Anthropic and the Pentagon unveiled the tensions among tech companies, the federal government, and the public over AI safety. Today's agenda, the conference agenda, has been designed to explore these challenges across 4 critical domains. This morning's sessions will examine how Pacific alliances are adapting in response to emerging critical technologies and shifting strategic dynamics, and then how new defense technologies are being developed and deployed. After the keynote fireside chat with our 2 distinguished national security advisors, we'll turn to cyber and AI threats before concluding with a session on space technologies, perhaps the most literal frontier among the frontiers we're exploring today. And I'd like to note that we're holding this session on May 4th, the Star Wars Day. May the 4th be with you. Our panels bring together diverse expertise, esteemed scholars, former and current senior government officials, and industry leaders and entrepreneurs join forces to help us synthesize the strategic, policy, technological, national security, and foreign relations dimensions of the questions that lie ahead. Thank you all for being here, and I look forward to a day of rigorous discussion and fresh thinking about these critical issues. Before we turn to our first panel, we have the pleasure of having our Consul General of Japan in San Francisco, Mr. Kotaru Otsuki, who will offer a brief welcome for us. Consul General Otsuki joined the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Japan in 1993 as a career diplomat. He has devoted a significant portion of his diplomatic career to Russia-related affairs and served in the Foreign Minister's office as well as at the Embassy of Japan in South Korea. He has also been deeply engaged in cybersecurity and digital transformation initiatives within the ministry. He assumed his current role as Consul General of Japan in San Francisco last fall, and we are honored to have him with us today, a recognition of the strong and enduring ties between Japan and Northern California. Consul General Otsuki, please join us. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Tsutsui. Good morning, all. Welcome to APAC U.S.-Japan Defense Tech Symposium. My name is Kotaru Otsuki. I'm a Consul General of Japan in San Francisco. I'd like to begin by expressing my sincere appreciation to both APAC and Professor Tsutsui for organizing this important and timely event. The world today is undergoing its most significant structural change since the Second World War, as countries increasingly seek to alter the status quo through force and coercion. In this event, in this environment, maintaining an international order based on the rule of law and universal values such as freedom, democracy, and human rights is essential. Strengthening regional deterrence and response capability is critical to that effort. And defense technology cooperation between Japan and the United States lies at its very heart. Under the Takaichi administration, Japan and the United States Japan-US alliance remains the cornerstone of Japan's diplomacy and national security. This was demonstrated by Prime Minister Takaichi's meeting with President Trump in Washington, D.C., where the two leaders reaffirmed their commitment to deeper security cooperation, from joint missile development to collaboration on cutting-edge technologies like AI. Separately, under Prime Minister Takaichi's broader national security strategy, Japan has identified 17 priority investment areas such as AI, cybersecurity, and space, where Japan and the United States must work together to maintain our competitive and technological edge. That partnership is evident right here in the Bay Area, with over 1,000 Japanese companies already present, and we have a solid foundation for deeper cooperation. Dual-use innovation between our two countries is accelerating rapidly, serving as a prime example of what this partnership can achieve. I hope today's discussions will translate into concrete steps, deepening our cooperation and further strengthening the deterrence and competitiveness that the Japan-US alliance embodies. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Consul General, for joining us today and for your thoughtful remarks. Let us now turn to our first panel, Pacific Alliances. I'd like to welcome the panelists to get up to the stage. And moderating this panel is Kemy Monahan, as I said a little bit earlier about her. She brings her deep expertise as a Foreign Service Officer with the US Department of State, most recently as US Deputy Chief of Mission in Japan. She is a former visiting scholar at APAC and currently an adjunct lecturer in Stanford's Ford Dorsey Masters in International Policy program. Kemy will introduce the three distinguished panelists. And with that, please join me in welcoming our first panel.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much. Thank you, Kiyo, really, for sponsoring this whole thing. Kiyo is the director for the last year of the Asia Pacific Research Center here at Stanford University, and his first year has just been outstanding. What a great leader. He took me in, and we've done some great things. We have a great staff, and I wanted to particularly recognize Kana, who has worked so hard on this. Kana, are you here? Kana, she's at the doorway pretending not to hear me. Thank you, Kana. And Mike, who made this amazing flyer. We have so many great staff members. So thank you so much for putting this all together. Thank you to all of you for being here today. This is an exciting topic. I hope you have as much fun with it as I do. This particular panel will set the stage for the entire day, as Kiyo mentioned. So these are the policymakers. These are the government representatives, the ones who are looking at technology and considering how it impacts our world and our foreign policy moving forward. I don't want to spend any more time talking about the panel. We need to start the panel. So we have some really amazing people on our panel today, starting with Rui Matsukawa. Matsukawa Sensei. I'm going to use their titles because I think it's important for you all to remember who they are. So Rui Matsukawa is what we hope for in public servants, truly a great role model for women, girls, and men worldwide. She is incredibly accomplished. She has broken through so many glass ceilings and earned her place among the most influential Japanese policymakers, lawmakers, foreign policymakers. She is a foreign policy and security policy heavyweight. She graduated in law from the prestigious Tokyo University, one of only 20% of women in the university. She joined the foreign ministry as a diplomat, very young, and soon was recruited to be in the Japanese Diet. She has won election not once but twice, and Fun fact about Rui, she studied at Georgetown University School of Foreign Service, as I did, we're both SFS, under Victor Cha, Dr. Victor Cha.
I was going to make sure you didn't miss that.
Yes, he discovered her. And in fact, he remembers Rui as the person who asked the really hard questions. So we're going to hold her to that again today, to ask hard questions to make the panel even more interesting. Next in line, we have Ambassador Tom Schieffer. So Ambassador Schieffer, so few ambassadors in the U.S. serve more than one tour. And Ambassador Schieffer not only served more than one tour, but he served 2 back-to-back tours over 10 years in 2 of our most important allied countries. So first in Australia from 2001, and then in Japan from 2005. Ambassador Schieffer started his career as a legislator, elected, so also a public policy elected like Rui-san. And then moved on to be a partner in the Texas Rangers with President George Bush. He also was the president of the franchise for 10 years, and he was the manager president of the building of the ballpark. And fun fact about Ambassador Schieffer, I worked for Ambassador Schieffer in Tokyo, and when you walked into his office on the 4th floor of the U.S. Embassy in Tokyo, you saw a bigger-than-life picture of the Arlington, Texas Rangers ballpark. And it was just so overwhelming, that's all you saw, which was very clever diplomacy. And not only that, but what better symbol of the US-Japan relationship than baseball? So it completely disarmed people immediately when they walked into his office. And immediately you were talking about baseball and the Rangers. And that's a tool of diplomacy. Maybe not technology, well, probably good high-definition photo. So that's Tom Schieffer. Thank you for being here. And finally, we have Victor Cha. So Victor Cha is the world expert in security in Asia, really bar none. Victor, I have notes for him, but I could go on and on. Let's see. Victor is the CSIS chair for Korea and also geopolitics. Victor worked in the NSC as the director for East Asia and Korea, a job I took many, many years later. But his legacy lasted. There were even some gifts that were given to him still in the office, which is amazing. Fun fact about Victor, well, not a fun fact, but serious fact about Victor is that he was the deputy in the 6-party talks with North Korea under the Bush administration. He has served both in Republican and Democratic administrations, most recently as an advisor to the Secretary of Defense in the Biden administration, but in the NSC under Bush. And finally, fun fact about Victor, if you Google the 2012 version of Red Dawn, Victor is in the opening part, and in that little montage of news, they show Victor saying, "What do the North Koreans want?" So we're hoping he'll give us the answer to his own question today. And with that, do watch the movie. With that, we will start the panel. So I think what we'll start out with is having each of our panelists talk about what they think is the impact of the emerging technologies on our foreign policy and our policy making. And I think we'll start with Ambassador Schieffer, if you don't mind. Ambassador Schieffer, I know you love history. Can you tell us a little bit about how history informs how we're dealing with technology now, what beneficial lessons we might learn from history?
Well, I think sometimes we fool ourselves into thinking that the new technology is the new technology and everything else goes that went before it doesn't count. And that's simply not true. New technology is affecting us now in a way that I think has not occurred before. It's more rapid than it has been in the past. And it happens so quickly and it changes so dramatically. But I like to think of a historical example that I think is important to remember. I think few Americans would know the answer to, if you ask what was the largest economy by, which were the largest economies in 1830. And I think most Americans would be surprised to know that it was China and India were the top two, and Great Britain was the third. And then the Industrial Revolution hits. And the Industrial Revolution quickly takes Great Britain ahead of both China and India. And China and India, I don't think, were aware of the effect that this new technology of the Industrial Revolution was going to bring. And it took them 140 years to escape that and to regain full sovereignty. And that's something I think we need to be concerned about. Concerned about it in the sense that we don't want to be, and I'm talking about the United States and Japan, we don't want to be the country that didn't understand the impact of the new technology. Because what happened to China and India in the process is they became the menu items on European imperialism. And as I said, it took a long time for them to recover. So I think we need to be aware of technology and the effect it's going to have, and not let hubris intervene with us and say, well, we're beyond that, it can't happen to us, because it can happen to us. And we have to be conscious of that, I think, as we move forward in the years ahead.
That's a great way to set the stage, because I think the biggest issue is exactly what we do with this technology, especially from a government perspective, whether the government should dominate it or the private sector should be more involved, and how to govern it. So let's keep thinking about that in the time we have left. Let's move on to Matsukawa Sensei. Thank you very much. Matsukawa Sensei, you are a critical leader in Japan's government, and specifically dealing with the defense and security aspects, as well as foreign policy. Can you tell me what kinds of technologies you are prioritizing, how you're prioritizing technologies, including when you formulate your budget?
Thank you for the question. And first of all, I'm really happy to be here and honored too. And especially in a very critical right moment. You know, we are in the era of crisis, and the power politics in the either mood. So every country, including Japan, is trying to be more independent in many ways, and try to strengthen resilience and sustainability in all fields, including defense to food security to energy to rare earths, and all of it is necessary for us to survive. And Ambassador Schieffer just enlightened us in a way that we are in that critical moment for the change of the era, so that we wouldn't be the one to be on the menu, exactly. And then I think the pace is really quick. So as a government of Japan, appreciating that the Japan-US alliance is based in the history in a way, that we have a more equal partnership and have a very deepest trust. Yet, I have to say, considering the power balance, let's say, between the US and China, I think we have to be more serious about strengthening ourselves, like Japan, and also the US. And the US has become a little bit more unpredictable. Therefore, as an ally of trust, Japan wants the US engaging in our region more. We will make efforts. Also, we will make efforts to strengthen ourselves. And also, we will make efforts to enlarge the partnership with other countries as well. And that's with that note, Takaichi-san, our Prime Minister Takaichi, is enjoying a great friendship with President Trump. That is great. And with that note, what GOJ is now trying to do is focusing on is, we see two wars, Ukraine, or two couple wars, war in Gaza. Now we're seeing the Iranian attack in Iran. And it's becoming so clear that the countries which dominates technology will achieve the hegemony. And because the way of the usage of the technology has become so different now, Ukraine, we see drones, cheap, disposable drones, think very valuable, expensive battleship. And we see let's say, the war in Gaza and war in Iran shows us how important intelligence is about. You know when exactly these leaders gather in where, in which time, and that's the intelligence, right? Where intelligence comes from? It's from cyber, and also human as well. But cyber intelligence is really important. And then Ukraine showed without Starlink, it couldn't have continued the war. So new technologies like drones, UAVs, and how to deal with it. And then the other thing is about cyber space. These are all important areas. So GOJ has decided to fund fundamentally to these important areas, AI, semiconductor, and space, and cyber. And in addition to that, we have decided to revise our national defense strategy, national security strategy. It was supposed to, we will revise it anyway because it's 5 years documents, basically. But we have decided to revise it within this year.
Early.
2 years much earlier than we expected, because seeing these changes in the warfare, and then the hegemony comes from the technology. So I think our coming document, revision of the 3 documents, the national security strategy, the pillars, one includes a new way of fighting, and also the industrial basis and sustainability of the warfare. That's one thing. The other thing is about economic security, because looking at China, whereas can actually, really is a leverage for changing the U.S. posture. So economic security is very important. That includes the areas that I mentioned. And also the third pillar is intelligence. I would say the fourth pillar is sea lane for us, because Japan is an island nation surrounded. And to secure sea lane, we need to enhance the capability of the first island chain countries like the Philippines. Also, we need cooperation with Australia. So in many ways, I stated a pretty rough idea about many things, but the key is technology. And then Japan and US can work together to make to be a frontier for these important technology if we cooperate together. Certainly, this Silicon Valley and the San Francisco University can play a big role. Thank you.
Thank you, Matsukawa Sensei. I think you've both really pointed out why so many people are here today. Look at this full room. This is the topic, right? This is the topic that will determine our diplomacy of the future, our policies across government, and your national security strategy 2 or 3 years early. It wasn't very long ago. It feels like yesterday that the last one came out. That is really something. Our friend Okano-san wrote in Foreign Affairs recently that Japan has to start thinking about strategic autonomy, and that's the blueprint for Japanese strategic autonomy. As we talk, I'd love to hear more about what that means, but technology does empower nations and policymakers and governance, and that's a great segue to Dr. Victor Cha, who is the expert on many of these things, Asian security. He just published an article in Foreign Affairs that I also highly recommend, both of their articles in Foreign Affairs, but Dr. Cha's article is about U.S. foreign policy toward North Korea, which really hasn't been addressed recently. The president doesn't seem to be talking about it, and so it hasn't really been in the news. So he brought it back up. Scared me to death, frankly. You should all read it. It's really something, the statistics on the capabilities of North Korea now. And so he's talking about a new way of approaching it. And what we all need to think about on this panel is how we can govern these things, right? How we can what the government should do, what the private sector should do. Can we have agreements to limit nuclear weapons in this age, to limit any kind of weapons in this age? And then, of course, throwing AI out there, which we'll talk about this afternoon. But the AI is another governance question. But my question for Victor, relating to his very excellent article in Foreign Affairs this week, is can we come to agreements that are enforceable with regard to technology? I'll just leave it open, but of course, North Korea and nuclear weapons is one. But anything you negotiated the 6-party talks, so you have some idea of how these negotiations play out.
Well, thank you. Thanks, Kemy, for the question, and thank you to Stanford, APARC, and the Japan program for hosting this very important conference. I had the pleasure of serving with this gentleman on my right when we were in government together. We first met when you were ambassador in Australia, and you know, in any administration, there are really like a handful of ambassadors who really are the ones that are able to pick up the phone and call the president. Most of the other ones are writing cables back to a black hole in the State Department. Tom Schieffer was one of those. He could pick up the phone and call the president at any time, and it scared the living daylights out of all of us. And that was why he was both in two of our most important allies, Australia and Japan. He was our ambassador. And Matsukawa sensei.
So you just call me Rui.
Rui.
so
Rui. And it's really a pleasure to serve with her. When I was my second year teaching at Georgetown, she was a student in my master's seminar, and we've been in touch ever since. And she's just been like done absolutely wonderfully for her country and for the reputation of Georgetown. So thank you very much. So Kemy, on the question, I agree with everything that's been said. I think when we look at sort of technology and international affairs right now, there is so much in flux. You know, the norms against the use of force have looked like they're eroding because of all the conflict we're seeing around the world. The reliability of alliances is in question, in part because of a paradigm shift in the way the United States is looking at the world. There's calls for burden shifting. There's trade weaponization taking place by both the two lead powers in the international system, the United States and China. But where does technology fit in all this? It's frightening because it's moving at a very fast pace, as Ambassador Schieffer said. But I try to be an optimist on these things, and I think there are real opportunities for the United States and its allies. You know, in this sort of very difficult environment, there are opportunities that are presented by technology, and I'll just mention two just to start. The first is that, as you suggested, Kemy, if the United States and allies can work together, somebody needs to set the norms and rules for how we use technology. Whether we're talking about, for example, the military uses of AI, right? The use of unmanned autonomous vehicles. Like, there needs to be rules and norms. We're in a new frontier where these things have not been set, and it's really important for, in my opinion, it's really important for countries that sort of believe in and help build the rules-based international order, even though it's under attack today, to be leading in terms of how we think about these rules and norms. In cyber, in AI, in space, where there's a lot of dual-use capabilities. And maybe this can't be done through organizations anymore like the UN, because the UN, in many ways, has been hampered by the conflict that's taking place around the world. But it could happen in groupings of countries that choose to define rules and then coordinate their policies in a way that they will all follow those rules, and others will then follow. This could be in the context of the G7 or the G20, probably more likely the G7, but I think there are real opportunities there. The second is more internal to each alliance, and that is what technology has done is, of course, it's created opportunities for governments to work together, but it has effectively expanded within each country the constituency for the alliance, right? So in the case of Korea, for example, this was largely a military alliance, but technology has greatly expanded all the different constituencies in cyber, in chips, in biotech, that are now all part of this alliance. And that's a hugely important aspect when we think about the resiliency of these alliances going forward. So yes, there's more autonomy, but at the same time, there is more, there is a broader and deeper base for the alliance than simply the policy military, the political military community
that traditionally were the ones that grew these alliances. And so I think that's extremely important also. So, you know, there are challenges for sure, but I think there's lots of opportunities.
You've mentioned communication as being so important, especially, for example, when the North Korean leader doesn't pick up the phone when the U.S. president calls. Technology has really advanced our communications so much, it's almost impossible not to get the messages in one form or another. It seems like you could sort of broadcast it on his bedroom ceiling if you wanted to from some little drone that got in there. What would you recommend as a policymaker, or is there a way that we can use technology to increase communication with these very difficult places to communicate? The Iranians also, we've had trouble communicating with regard to potential negotiations. The Russians, I'm not sure when they answer the phone. And China, there was a Kurt Campbell Foreign Affairs article saying that there's no red phone for China. I remember how important the red phone was with Russia. Is there a technology solution, or is there any solution to this communication gap that will help us in the future?
Starting with me?
Back to you.
So I think I would answer that in two ways. The first is technology, the speed of technology and the speed of communication can greatly accelerate crisis situations. You know, I mean, I think the United States and China have been working on, maybe even have agreed to something where when it comes to the use of nuclear weapons, there will not be AI algorithms that determine the use of nuclear weapons, right? This is extremely important. These sorts of things are extremely important. And I would imagine we'd want to reach those sorts of agreements with every nuclear power, even the countries we don't recognize as nuclear powers, to avoid, you know, the nightmare of nuclear first use. So I think that's extremely important in terms of communication. The other way is, I mean, again, if we look at a country like North Korea, you know, I would like to see technology that allows the North Korean people to communicate with the world, right? Things like Starlink or other sorts of capabilities that will be able to get information, not just in the autocratic society of North Korea, but other autocratic societies that open up the world for them to see, free of charge, right? And free of sort of political constraints. That would be another way I think technology could be used in a very positive way. But there are others. But I mean, I would just give those two answers to start. So.
Any other thoughts from the two of you on any of these topics, or I have other questions?
Well, I think the Cuban Missile Crisis was a great teacher in the process, because we came that close to blowing up the world. And I think the hot phones then multiplied. And I think you have to convince, I don't know whether you have to convince our side or both sides, that you want to have that level of communication, because there are mistakes that occur. And subsequent to the Cuban Missile Crisis, you had, I think, 2 or 3 times when there was a glitch in the system in which it showed missiles launching. And that came pretty close. And surely, if we were able to calmly address this with others, they would recognize the importance that it's a two-way street that you need, because there are going to be mistakes that happen. We're human beings, and the technology is such that it makes mistakes. And it's in everyone's interest that we have this kind of communication on an immediate basis.
As diplomats, we used to worry about the dangers of misinterpretation of truthful information. Now we have so much misinformation, it just multiplies the dangers that you're talking about.
And I think it's also very important, I was looking at General Raymond over here, I think it's very important for people at the top in the militaries to have continuous ability to call one another and just to say what's going on. And if you do that over a period of time, you build up a trust that you need when that mistake happens. And I think that's something we could pay more attention to, frankly, and it would have great benefits if we could do it.
I may be getting into the area, a classified area, so don't say anything you don't want to say, Rui Sensei, but I'm wondering, I think the communication between the U.S. and Japan, and between the U.S., Japan, and Korea, and between Japan and Korea has gotten better and better, in part because of technology. When I was in Victor's job at the NSC, we were able to get something in the Cambodia statement where we would share real-time information between Japan and Korea, as well as the U.S. and Japan and Korea on the North Korean missile launches. And that was just a small thing, but it makes a big difference. But I'm wondering what you think about those kinds of communication technologies and what the advantages and disadvantages are of having that technology to communicate.
I think the technology is one thing, but whether the leaders can have a direct communication or the military top should definitely needs to communicate to avoid any unnecessary conflicts. But that being said, I think it's whether you can use that technology is actually depends on the trust or like understanding about the necessity. So still, I think the diplomacy or the confidence building, not for the agreement itself, because you fight, you have differences. That's why you're not on the same page. But still, I think there should be a certain minimum understanding about the necessity for the direct communication. And if it's lacking, even though you have a greatest technology, it doesn't really work. So my sense is, because now we are coming into the AI age, if you look at the SNS, like internet, there are bunches of the fake news, and you have to have the ability or the technology to recognize which is a true source of the information and which is false. So, and then the technology itself needs to include, human being cannot really see whether this is correct or not. And also we are too slow to respond. So avoiding the AI algorithm vis-a-vis with regards to a nuclear weapon is a sensible decision. But not just that, I think technology needs to include the technological solution within. I think that's what the experts should work on. I'm not a tech person, but there are maybe many tech persons here. Tech persons, I really hope that, we hope that each technologies, AI or quantum computing or the lightning, needs to include some technological solution within. I think that's a very important area for the experts to work on.
Is the Japanese government, and are you in the Diet looking into ways to, I don't want to say govern AI, but institute some kinds of rules like this where the technology has to have checks?
The UN?
Oh, sorry, is the Japanese Diet, are you, as Japanese policymakers, thinking about how to do that?
Semi, but we haven't come up to the very specifics yet. We are now forming the AI policy within our party, and it could be formulated to some part of the rules to how to use the AIs, or like a protection from the false AI usage.
Are you looking at the European Union rules?
I think we may be able to collaborate.
Very interesting.
But still, it's like something that we have to work on from now. Mm-hmm.
Very interesting, very important, and very difficult.
Very difficult.
Another question for the panel. So how is technology impacting the balance of power among countries? America had a lot of power for a long time, and now even the middle powers and even smaller powers are buying drones and using misinformation very effectively. So how is that impacting the balance of power, and what should leaders and policymakers be thinking about and doing to keep global security in line? Anyone? Victor? Dr. Cha.
So it's not an easy question to answer because so technology clearly is a source of power, right? It's an asset, just like military power, economic power. But how do you define who's in the lead, right? I mean, it's really difficult. I mean, we look at the AI race between the United States and China, for example, right? This race to get to AGI, right? And we've done in the previous administration, they had a strategy basically to decouple like high-end chips from China, right? And look at the way China has responded, right? They have responded by following a different path, using less sophisticated chips, but proliferating robotics, and and it's like with a strategy for the global south and so on and so forth, with what, 26 nanometer chips or something, or I mean,
Huge.
yeah, huge, right? Huge, just huge. And we're taking a different path to try to get to AGI. So who's in the lead there? I think we like to believe we're in the lead because we're looking really for the cutting edge sort of capabilities that might somehow negate or undercut or be able to sort of lead while China is sort of stuck in a but it's not really clear at all. The other thing is that when we think about the balance of power, like within like the U.S. and its allies, it's very clear that countries like, as you mentioned, countries like Korea, Japan, at the high end, and then other countries like Vietnam, the Philippines, and others at the input end, critical minerals and others, these all become extremely important now in terms of any sort of technology alliance. And there are divisions of labor in that technology alliance. So I look very carefully at Korea, and the interesting thing about Korea is that tremendous technology opportunities, but most interestingly, a clear division of labor in the sense that, Korea or any other ally, so the United States is always leading on design, right? And then once the design is completed, the allies are very good at sort of the manufacturing part of it, right? And so you have some sort of division of labor, if you will, whether we're talking about chips or ships, for that matter, or biotech. This is a huge area for U.S. technology alliances because, almost all active pharmaceutical ingredients now are made in China, right? So there's huge opportunity there, but there's also tension there too, because when it comes to the manufacturing side, on the U.S. side, we say, great, like manufacturing, we want that done here in the United States. Whereas for countries like Korea and others, they see opportunities to bring manufacturing of things like U.S. ships, right, to Korea, or pieces of U.S. ships to Korea. So again, these things, within these alliances, there's shifting power as a result of technology that create huge opportunities, but also there are some inherent tensions as they pursue those opportunities.
It's a really interesting time in our world, and you've just described it, moving essentially from completely free market, guns and butter philosophy to industrial policy, thinking about how to have more manufacturing in Japan. We were talking about that. And this idea of restricting chip exports versus not, and seeing how either one works. I think when I was in the Biden administration, of course, we were looking at that small yard, tall fence, and at least protecting the smaller nanometer ones, because we thought we shouldn't at least be giving them to China. And a lot of people argue that if we just opened it up, by restricting it, we encourage them to develop their own and they have, and they have produced more of the smaller ones. But wouldn't they have developed their own faster, having already announced that China would do its own thing regardless of anything else? I don't know if there are any answers to this, but it's very tough for policymakers, isn't it? I mean, how do you decide whether to start industrial policy again after all these years of prosperity under Adam Smith?
Yeah, I think it's, maybe I shouldn't say that. From a policy perspective, technology controls are just, they seem easy to do, but but the question of effectiveness is very unclear. To me, it's just like tariffs. Like, they're easy to do, and they have a clear concept behind them, but their effectiveness is not clear because, as one of our board members once said, when you do things like this, it's like putting a rock in a stream. You put the rock down, you think you're blocking the water, but the water finds another way around, right? And so it's a huge policy challenge.
Ambassador Schieffer?
Well, I think when we talk about balance of power, I don't think the balance of power is dramatically different than it has been. Because, with one exception, I think Russia, I think all of us thought that Russia had a much better military machine than it did.
Right.
And we figured that out pretty quickly, because when you invade a country and you have a 50-mile-long column of tanks and you run out of gas on the third day, you didn't know what you were doing, or you didn't listen to anybody who knew what they were doing. And I think, having said that, Russia still has nuclear weapons, and they still have the ability to use them, and that makes it dangerous. But I think we have to be together. I think we have to work together. And here's a bit of news to you. Every country wants to do the manufacturing in their country because of the political situation that creates. So we have to kind of figure out how to balance those two interests so that everybody gets a piece of the pie. I was in Australia when the F-35 came out, and I thought the F-35 was really a sea change, because it basically was selling parts of the F-35 across multiple countries. And I think that works pretty well. And the F-35 is a great airplane. So I think there are ways to do this, but I think we have to be realistic with each other and realize that every country is going to do what it feels is in its best interest, if it can. And we have to work out a way where you can make sure that it is their interest and that we all get along and do it together. But this is a big thing. I think the world is more integrated now than it has ever been. When you get into supply chains, and you realize that with COVID and all the other things, it's very hard for anybody to do everything in their country. And we have to figure out a way to do that better, I think. But I don't think the balance of power per se is out of balance right now.
Thank you for emphasizing the importance of alliances too. This is what our discussion is all about. The balance of power is shifting, technology is impacting it. I'd love to hear the Japanese perspective on all of that, and maybe you could give us advice as U.S. policymakers.
You see, we talked about geopolitics before, and we still talk. And then after that, we have to enlarge it to geoeconomy. And then I think it's geotech now. I mean, from the Japanese perspective, you see, now that we are in the really balance of power age, I mean, the power matters. And then it depends on the country, because I think from my perspective, what we can call the empire, meaning like you have the large size of population, large size of the land, maybe the energy and food. Maybe you can call like the US and China, possibly Russia and India can be an empire from the perspective of the balance of power. And then technology does matter. But let's say Israel is a super tech country. 99% of the Hezbollah drone attack was killed by the iron beam and drone, so that's great. But Israel wouldn't be a threat to the world, I mean, in a way that China poses, because it's too small. And when it comes to Japan, I think what we as Japan to survive in this difficult time, we still have to try to be more strategically independent as much as possible, not just in the defense, but in our energy. Although we are not energy country, still we have to strengthen energy sufficiency capability more as much as possible by introducing maybe a small summer nuclear reactor, or maybe we should have more new type of the solar panels, whatever. And then like food security as well. And then we, as Japanese, I think, policymaker, we have to think about make Japan doesn't depending on a certain specific country for important area. It doesn't matter whether it's a high, cutting-edge technology in AI, or like shipping, which is not super tech or anything, but as an island nation, it's critical. So to me, technology is one of the high cutting-edge technology is only one of the areas that, as a nation of Japan, to survive. So 17 strategic areas that the Takaichi government has decided to enhance investment by the government includes high-tech, like AI and quantum computing or space, but also includes shipping or pharmaceutical, which is critical for us for as a nation to survive. So as a strategy of a nation, we will, as Ambassador Schieffer and Victor mentioned, we have to be indispensable part of the supply chain, but we wouldn't depending on one specific country, whether it's foe or enemy, in my sense, especially foe is not out of question. And try to be as independent as possible, because you really don't count on the others to save yourself. And then I think that's possible because we are not trying to defeat any country. Japan wants to just defend ourselves from any other aggression. So deterrence is a key. And I think making a nation to be able to strong enough to deter is possible if you really make efforts. Technology also. I think U.S. and Japan can be a best partner for exploring cutting technology in AI or quantum computing. These, I think, in the cyber are key areas, space too, for us to not be on the menu, rather we will be more on the rule-setting side in the future.
You've done a great job explaining how technology crosses over everything and all the different issues that you, as a member of the Japanese legislature, has to think about at the same time. I can't imagine trying to bring that all together and figure where to put your budgets. That's a difficult job. I'm also just shocked at your statement that Japan has to do things independently, and Okano-san's statement that Japan has to have strategic autonomy. A year and a half ago, it was all about the free and open Indo-Pacific and all about alliances, and no one would, especially Japan, wouldn't be saying, "I want to do things. We want to do." Of course, you have to have your own self-determination, but your plan was always so integrated with ASEAN, with the region, with the U.S., and now there's much more talk of we have to make our own place, which is interesting and good, but also. Doesn't feel as secure as it did when there was a little bit more alignment in the Pacific.
Kemy, I might, it's not contradictory at all. For a more independent Japan, more stronger Japan can serve better for the alliance with the U.S., partnership with the Southeast Asian countries or Asian countries, and definitely our identity is in Asia, and we want to enhance. Let's say Asian partners like the Philippines, Indonesians, together with maybe the Australian, to enhance their capability for protecting their sea lanes or maybe their economy. And that's why the Prime Minister Takaichi went to, decided to supply our oil to enhance their oil reserve ability for the Philippines. So it's still there. FOIP is an important pillar. My point is, Japan, as you know, because we lost the war vis-a-vis the US, and we have been hinged ourselves for a long time. We have to overcome the post-war regime. We have to. We don't have independent intelligence agency. We are going to establish one in a few years. And we had restricted our arms sales to other countries. We abandoned the restrictions already. So my point is, Japan should self-resilient as much as possible by becoming normal country. And that's how we can serve for the betterment for the region. And the strong Japan-US alliance, strengthening US-Japan alliance, and making ourselves strong is not contradictory. It's actually supplement each other.
Can you just explain very briefly when you say Japan becoming a normal country, and you mentioned earlier that meant ending the post-war era and moving into the normal country era. Can you talk a little bit more about what that means?
If I may, I do think we have to revise the Constitution to make us allowed to have no restrictions on the exercise of the self-defense or collective self-defense. I mean, this is so wrong I've been thinking this for a long time. It's so wrong for the legal experts to determine what we can do in terms of the security situation. Security experts need to decide what we should do. Of course, and that, totally incompatible with the international law. But other than that.
Thank you very much. We have a few more minutes, and I want to do a lightning round, and then you have so many people here who want to ask questions. But I just wanted to ask one question to you, too, before we open it up and have the lightning round. The question is really the role of the private sector in technology. It's growing more and more. Technology is more of the wild, wild west, especially when you talk about space and all the places that really don't have regulation. What do you think about the role of the private sector? And from a academic and government standpoint, how can we make sure that it's all aligned for the right reasons for stability and security? Ambassador Schieffer.
Well, I think you're right. The private sector is much more involved in the defense industry or defense policy than it has been in the past. If you look at the Pentagon budget over the last few years, you'll see more and more money that has been targeted for small companies that are just coming into being and that are right on the cutting edge of technology. I think that's a very good thing to do. I think that there is a situation in which we can probably build aircraft and naval vessels and army vessels and all that cheaper than we do it in the United States today. And I think the things that come out of smaller companies prove that. So I don't think that's a bad thing. I think that's a good thing. But I think we have to overall have a policy of what we're trying to do. And right now, I'm a little unsure of what American policy is in a number of areas. And I think that could be much better defined. But I think a real introduction of the private sector could be quite helpful and more economical, which will get you more defense in the end than the way we've done it before. And I will add one thing. The defense companies, and this is not a criticism of the defense companies, but they're very intelligent, and the members of Congress are very intelligent because every district, every congressional district has somebody that is getting some piece of some building that we're doing. And that's better politics than it is policy. But politics are a part of the process that you have to manage. But I think the ability to get more private sector input is a good thing, not a bad thing.
Silicon Valley likes to hear that for sure. Dr. Chong.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that. I mean, we're in a completely new world now where, industrial policy used to be a dirty word, and that's certainly no longer the case. And really, there's responsibilities on all sides, I think. On the government side, there is a responsibility. The government just has to be much more nimble and able to adapt because not only is technology changing, but things like what happened in Ukraine have completely, almost totally revolutionized the way we think about, should we be spending $4 million on a Patriot missile or on like a swarm of $100,000 drones and subsurface drones, surface drones, subsurface drones? It's completely changed things, and so it requires government, and I think these changes are being made in government to be much more agile and nimble to work with the private. The private sector is always agile and nimble, but to work with them. And then on the private sector side, there's also responsibility too. And I'd love to hear from others, but to me, this is actually quite challenging, which is, it's not just about the bottom line, right? It's just not about making money, and so that may mean things like if there is a decision to decouple in a particular technology, nobody else should be backfilling, right? That technology. I've been in hearings in Congress where congressional members, we'd be talking about one particular issue having to do with decoupling on a particular technology, and they would hear about other companies that are maybe not American, but that are backfilling, and there are American VCs that are supporting those companies, these new startup companies to backfill. And they were like, I want to know, they want to know who those companies are. They said, we'll pass legislation. We want to know who those companies are. So yes, these two must work, they're required to work together, and it's clearly for mutual benefit, both on the security side and on the profit side. But there are also, both sides have responsibilities on the government side to be more agile, and on the private sector side to understand it's just not about like how much money they can make in the end. I know they have shareholders and all this, but when you enter that enterprise, there are responsibilities on both sides.
And the U.S. government is a shareholder sometimes in them now, so that complicates it even more. It's a fascinating topic, and it's really just every day something new. Thank you so much for this. We will do a lightning round of one question for each panelist to answer in 1 to 2 minutes, and then we'll open it up for questions. So the question for the lightning round is, what technology will be most significant in the future? Matsukawa-sensei, would you like to start? The most significant technology for the future of the world, of Japan, of the U.S., whatever future you imagine.
I think AI. I think because AI will change the way of the work in not in just specific field, but I think it changes whole, the way we wouldn't be able to imagine at this moment. So we have to be watchful, and we shouldn't be the one to follow someone, but rather to try to explore.
Mythos just broke a couple months ago, right? Can you? The change with Claude Code, and then it is unbelievable, and it really is the Wild Wild West. I can't wait till Jay Raymond comes up and talks about the Wild West of space, but the Wild West of AI is truly
Although for
amazing.
Japan, for now, I think what we need right now is cyber capability. But I think for that, as the technology, I think it's the AI.
Thank you. Ambassador Schieffer.
I think it's AI because I know the least about AI. but I think the thing that concerns me about AI is it going to cause people to lose their ability to reflect on what they've done? Because you can get an answer to any question. It may not be the right answer, but that's going to increase as it goes on. But I think we have to be very careful that we don't let the machine run us. And that is going to have to require us to do a more thoughtful job than I think we've done so far. And there have to be some sort of guardrails. And I'm not one who is a big government interventionist and all that, but I just think this is a dangerous situation. When people worry today, I don't think it's just in the United States, I think it's all over the world, or whether they're going to have a job tomorrow or 5 years from now, or whether their children are going to be able to have work, literally. And we've got to have some better answers than we have now, and because it's still in its beginning stages, but I do worry about it more than I probably should.
So I thought about this, and I was going to say maybe SMR or batteries because because you need to power the AI revolution. But I ended up landing on semiconductors for a couple of reasons. One, they're critical to all of this. They're critical to AI. They're critical to quantum. They are really a good engine of cooperation between technology alliance partners, as I talked about, because of the design manufacturing sort of partnership. They'll be absolutely critical to the future of military weapons in terms of autonomous weapons, and they are central to the supply chain sort of economic security question that Rui was talking about earlier. chips will be absolutely central to that. In terms of being able to reduce dependence, reduce vulnerabilities on others. So that would be my answer.
Great answers. Professor Andy Grotto and I are teaching a class on this same topic at Stanford, and some of our students are here today, and we asked them to write their first paper on this, what's the future technology.
It'll be interesting to see what they say.
Really interesting. They did come up with quantum, AI, semiconductors definitely in the top, but also some really interesting nuclear energy and weapons, of course, robotics, though, and some really interesting space-based technologies, including some of the laser stuff and space-based energy. Anyway, technology is such a
How about
fascinating
just crude oil?
Is that a technology? Yeah.
It's in short supply these days, I hear.
There's so many things. There's so many things to think about and worry about, and we're so grateful to all of you for thinking and writing and talking to students and governing and helping us move to this next stage of the world where technology is such an important part of it. With that, I would love to open up to questions in the audience. We have a couple of microphones here. If you just step up and speak to the microphones, or are we going to pass them around? No, I think if you could just stand up and ask the questions, that would be great. And if people want to line up behind our gentleman
Thank you so much for the panel. My name is Ethan. I am a Stanford alum, and I just saw this thing. And I don't know much about Japan. From the conversation, what stood out was Rui's comment about Japan tracing their own independent path. And that made me wonder, and I'm going to link that with the Iran situation. Does it include Japan developing nuclear weapons? Because that is what Iran wants to do. They want to have enrichment capability for civilian. Japan is their model. So if Japan is going to go that path, then that has a lot of implications for the global world order.
Thank you for that good question. You may want to defer that question to someone who's out of government. I don't know if you can. But
thank you.
Matsukawa-sensei.
Okay, thank you for the question. It's a good question, and often asked, actually. And the thing is, currently, we are holding 3 non-nuclear principles, which is no possession, no development, and no bringing in. And already Prime Minister Takaichi is hinting that in case of the necessity, we will not necessarily hitting, and actually it's not Takaichi-san's policy, it's been our policy for a long time, that in case of the emergency, necessity, we will may bring which means U.S. nuclear weapons into our territory so that we can deter the possible crisis better. And then for the future question, I personally think it's not a personal, I think we have to definitely enhance the nuclear deterrence capability. Currently, extended deterrence by the U.S. nuclear weapons is protecting us. And we have to strengthen that. That's one thing. And the other thing is, I think we have to have, and to do so, we have to have a better high-level communications for the nuclear deterrence policy between US and Japan, possibly with the South Korea as well, because they share the same concern with us. So that's one thing. And then for developing the nuclear weapons, it's not at the agenda yet, but I personally don't think it's really, I don't know whether it's really worth doing, because China has thousands of nuclear weapons, Russia more, and North Korea some. And then if you want to deter you have a nuclear deterrence on your own independently, you have to be prepared to produce at least hundreds. And a couple of the nuclear weapons doesn't make much sense. And I think it's maybe for realistic point of view, exploring a robust long-range missiles capability of conventional may be a better solution for now. But that being said, nuclear deterrence is only brought by the nuclear weapons. So strengthening the extended deterrence is definitely necessary. And to make it happen, trust between Japan and the US is very important. And Japan-US alliance must be strong.
Could I add one thing to that?
Sure, of course.
I think that this is not something different than has been said before. When I was in Japan, the first prime minister I dealt with was Prime Minister Koizumi. The second one was Prime Minister Abe in his first term. Both of them described the desire for Japan to be a normal country again. And I didn't see that as a threat to the United States. I actually thought it was a positive move on Japan's part. And I think that's what the conversation is turning into. I said last night, I think that Japan has become a normal nation. And you can't get away from the legacy of World War II. It lasted so long in Asia. And I think it really came to an end. We talked about this last night when Prime Minister Abe, when President Trump pulled out of TPP, everybody thought it was lost. Prime Minister Abe came in and really saved it until the time when the United States would be of the right mind to join it again. And I think that's when a large part of the criticism of Japan, I don't know how many times a Japanese prime minister has apologized for World War II, but it's often met with, it's insincere. The apology is insincere, and the Chinese lead that. Well, if everything you say is insincere, you can never get to the point where it's accepted. I think now it has been accepted, and I think the war is finally over, and that's in everybody's interest, Japan and the United States.
Two finger. Yeah. So just a couple of data points. The first is on Ambassador's last point. So I mean, in Southeast Asia today, the polling shows that Japan is considered one of the most trusted countries in the world. Feelings like that certainly in Taiwan as well. I mean, even in Korea, today, China is the most disliked country. It's not Japan. So things are really changing. And then the other thing I'll say is just as a historical footnote, some of you out here know this as well, is that Japan's move towards so-called normalcy in sort of the history of the alliance is something that is not disruptive in the sense that the United States, going back to like 1969, and the Nixon-Sato joint and the reversion of Okinawa, was always pushing Japan to do more, right? And it was what was established with the Yoshida Doctrine that kept pulling Japan back. And so, what Rui's talking about, these trend lines, what the Takaichi government is doing, is not disruptive to the alliance. As Rui said, it's seen as strengthening the alliance, and as well as strengthening trilateral cooperation among the three key allies, as well as Australia and the Philippines. What Japan is now doing with Australia and the Philippines really is sort of, what do you call it, connecting the spokes, right, of the hub and spoke system.
And the exercises that Japan is really helping coordinate with the alliance there, with as far as Germany and France and Australia and even New Zealand through the Taiwan Strait and also in the South China Sea, is true partnership and leadership.
Definitely.
I wanted to follow up with Victor on that same question for South Korea and nuclear weapons. What's the status of their policy?
So so I know it gets a lot of attention in the press because the polling, public opinion polling in South Korea says 75 to 80% of the South Korean public want to go nuclear. We have me and Dr. Christy Gavella have a piece coming out in Foreign Affairs. We actually have new data that shows that not at the public level, but at the strategic elite level, and strategic elites are the ones that make national security policy, not the public. At the strategic elite level, support for going nuclear in South Korea is actually quite low. It's like somewhere around 26%. And those who are against it self-identify as politically quite diverse. So they're conservatives, progressives, moderates. So there is a strong anti-nuclear strategic elite base. But of course, and we find the same in Japan, obviously. But of course, as Rui said, there is more openness in Japan to talking about the 3 non-nuclear principles. And there is generally more openness in Japan about having an open discussion about the pros and the cons of nuclearization, which was something that was not the case before. So.
Thank you. Yes, please.
Thank you. My name is Lita Wars. I was actually about to ask the same question, but since we just went through that, building upon the conception of potentially opening up Japan's defense obligations, restrictions, I should say, and Pacific alliances, is there thought towards more of a formalized NATO-esque type of Asian defense regime, possibly with Japan leading it, based off of the current instability? Previously, we thought NATO and the U.S. was always going to lead that, but since that may not be the case, I'm curious what you think.
Thank you so much. I think we need certain architecture, but it's not like solid as NATO. I think Japan has been already made efforts for some years to strengthen the network with the cooperation, especially maritime cooperation, maritime security cooperation with the Philippines, the Indonesians, Australians, or this first island chain, because sea lane is really important, not just for Japan, for South Korea or other countries in the region. So in a way, let's take maritime affairs, maritime security is one agenda, let's say, and then we can have a network amongst these countries as Australia, the Philippines, and Japan, and South Korea. And maybe let's take another issue. We can build up another type of the grouping of the countries, core countries. So layers after layers, we can sort of, Japan can, take initiative for grouping and enhancing their networks for certain agenda in many layers. I think that's an evolving situation. And that's also a core of the Indo-Pacific, free and open Indo-Pacific. Although the big countries is India and Australia and Japan and US. But US is how much, regardless of the US is how enthusiastic the present government is about, but still I think that's what Japan's role to play. Not necessarily NATO type strong legal binding framework. I don't see that fitting in Asia now, because Southeast Asian countries do not necessarily trust China, but they need one, and they don't want to be sandwiched by the US and China either. And I think Japan can play a very constructive role in this situation to gather the countries of concern, sharing the same concern. So that may be the Japan's role. I think we have been playing. We want to accelerate and enhance in the role.
Yeah.
Japanese leadership in the region has been so important, but this idea of a Pacific NATO is an interesting one.
Historically, the United States has thought about this, and the question, back then was, okay, would China be in or out, right? And so that always confounded the idea. Of course, now with U.S.-China strategic competition, the notion of groupings forming certainly makes sense. But as Rui said, in parts of Southeast Asia and other parts of Asia, people are, even in India, people are not ready to go that far, right? They're not ready to go that far and say, this is a collective defense organization targeted on China. Having said that, there is, I would see it as a layering of these coalitions now, whether it's a technology alliance, whether it's on freedom of navigation, whether it's on chips. There are groupings that are coming together that generally include the democracies of Asia, right? The United States, Japan, South Korea, Australia, the Philippines, and others that are generally sort of coming together issue-based. The closest thing we have to what your question asks is what happened in Camp David, right? Which was the U.S., Japan, and Korea at the leader level making the what was it called? The commitment to consult? The commitment to consult, which is the closest thing to a collective defense declaration among the three sides. As we were talking about at dinner last night, I personally think a very important step in building this is a Japan-Korea bilateral security declaration. That doesn't exist. Ambassador Schieffer was in government when Japan and Australia had a bilateral security declaration, and that to me would make a lot of sense now. But it'll never look like NATO. I mean, the problem is every other alliance is compared to NATO when NATO really is the exception, not the rule. And every other alliance is, has kind of grown up organically in its own way. So.
And that example of the Australia relationship has just grown so much since Ambassador Schieffer and those first agreements, and now Japan is selling the Mogabe-class nuclear subs to Australia. Some huge connections and collaboration.
And I think it is growing by the day,
Yes.
literally.
Yes.
And I must say, and I hate to bring this up again, but when I was in Australia, the last thing I did before I went to Japan was to talk about the Australians providing force security for the Japanese that had a battalion in there. And literally, Prime Minister Howard asked to do that. I mean, agreed to do it. And he got a lot of flack, frankly, from an anti-Japanese, anti-war playback. After it happened, and it was successfully done, and there were no casualties taken, and the Japanese were very happy with the Australians were very happy with the Japanese, everything changed. And I never thought when I was in Australia that the Australians would agree to have Japanese forces trained in the Northern Territories, but they do, and they regularly rotate through there now. And that was just something I couldn't have imagined. But I think we're in a different day, and it's a better day, frankly.
Ambassador Dr. Cha, Matsukawa Sensei, thank you for ending on this upbeat note on Pacific alliances. We have great hope for the future of technology with our alliances, and alliances being the key. Let's give the panel a hand.